It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. The post office chairman forced out of his job after mounting tension with the government following the Horizon IT scandal. A warning of a looming famine in Gaza as the UK and the US halt funding of a UN operation over allegations of involvement in the October 7th attack. We hear the appeal from Ukraine's naval chief for permission to use Western weapons deeper inside Russia. The Queen's visit to see the King in hospital as he continues his recuperation from prostate treatment. Act on deepfakes, the White House call after fake explicit images of pop star Taylor Swift were shared online. Keeping the flame of memory alive, commemorations are held across the country to mark Holocaust Memorial Day. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. The chairman of the post office has been forced out of his job amid frustration in government over how the publicly owned organization is run. The post office's actions during the scandal over the treatment of sub-postmasters wrongly accused of fraud are currently being investigated by a statutory inquiry. Henry Staunton only became chairman just over a year ago. He was told of his departure in a call with the business secretary, Kemi Badenoch. Sky's Laura Bundock reports.
He's only been in the job a year, but Henry Staunton's time as chairman of the post office is now up. Forced out in the fallout from the Horizon IT scandal. A scandal facing renewed scrutiny with the ongoing inquiry dominating headlines. News of the chairman's departure welcomed by postal workers who lost their livelihoods.
It was clear that the post office back then had a major problem with its corporate governance oversight, and he was obviously brought in to try and fix that. And I think we can look now, more than it's only a year down the line, and nothing has changed with the post office. So we still have it's just revelation after revelation.
It was Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch who dealt the final blow. A government spokesperson said in a phone call earlier today, the Secretary of State for Business and Trade and Henry Staunton, chair of Post Office Limited, agreed to part ways by mutual consent. An interim will be appointed shortly and a recruitment process for a new chair will be launched in due course, in accordance with the Governance Code for Public Appointments. The faulty Horizon software system sparked Britain's biggest miscarriage of justice, wrongly convicting hundreds of postal workers of theft and false accounting. Political tensions are high. The post office is owned by the government and ministers are anxious about its corporate governance. Others want an even greater shake-up.
It's about major cultural change that needs to happen. And that can only be done, I think, if you have major change at the top. And I've got to say there should be a serious question mark over Nick Reed, the Chief Executive's own position.
Hundreds of postal workers are still to be compensated. The government's pushing through legislation to speed up the exoneration and compensation process. That bill could be £1.5 billion. This decision shows the government's running out of patience with the post office and wants to wield more influence as it attempts to get a firmer grip on this spiralling crisis. Laura Bundock, Sky News.
Well, our political correspondent Tamara Cohen joins me live now from Westminster. So, Tamara, has this come out of the blue?
It does seem to have. This was a decision made rather suddenly by ministers, reflecting, I'm told, a desire to hold the post office management's feet to the fire at this tricky time. But after my colleague Mark Kleinman broke the story this afternoon, we received a statement from the Business Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, which did not give a specific reason. This is what she said. The post office is rightfully under a heightened level of scrutiny at this time. With that in mind, I felt there was a need for new leadership, and we have parted ways, she said, with mutual consent. We understand she in fact called him this afternoon to tell him that he was sacked. Now, while we understand there were a number of sources of tension between the Post Office and the government, and some of them were not directly linked to the Horizon scandal, the Prime Minister has called that scandal one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history, and there have been flashpoints over it over the past year. Last year, we learned that Post Office executives had wrongfully taken bonuses for cooperating with the inquiry into the Horizon scandal. We heard at the end of last year accusations that the Post Office had not furnished the inquiry with the documents it needed. And we know that it was the Post Office Minister, Kevin Hollingreight, who was really leading the charge in wanting to hold the Post Office accountable for some of these decisions. The victims of this scandal have said that they want to see what the government has said to them, that they will be compensated and exonerated, matched with swift action. There will now be a new chair, someone the government has appointed to this role. This comes at the height of the scandal. We know that the minister in charge has told colleagues, I understand, of his frustration that it took a TV documentary to really get the Post Office focused on this scandal. There will now be a new chair, and the pressure to deliver could not be higher.
Tamara Cohen with the latest there from Westminster. Tamara, thank you. And the Business Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, will be on Sunday morning with Trevor Phillips tomorrow. You can watch that interview right here on Sky News from 8:30. The UK has announced it's joining the US, Canada, Australia and Italy in suspending funding to the United Nations Relief Agency in Gaza, following claims that some of its staff were involved in the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. UNRWA's commissioner, that's Philippe Lazzarini, tonight urged them to reconsider and said that it would be, in his words, immensely irresponsible to sanction an entire agency and those it serves because of allegations against some individuals. He added that the lives of people in Gaza depend on the ongoing work of UNRWA and warned of a looming famine. While the UNRWA is primarily funded through contributions from UN member states as well as the European Union, the annual budget for UNRWA is $1.6 billion. The US contributes almost $344 million, and the UK contributes over $21 million, and that's almost 17 million pounds. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkhold reports.
The fighting in Gaza is as relentless as ever. Thousands are continuing to flee south in the hope of finding safety, but often finding very little shelter, food, or even clean water. Now, the organisation that supports them, the UN agency UNRWA, is facing another challenge, with the UK joining the US and others by suspending its funding. It follows the UN suspending its own staff members accused of taking part in Hamas's attack on Israel on the 7th of October. The UK Foreign Office said that the UK is temporarily pausing any future funding of UNRWA whilst we review these concerning allegations. We remain committed to getting humanitarian aid to the people in Gaza who desperately need it. It was Israel who provided the UN with the information that their staffers were allegedly involved, and the country's representative to the UN was quick to denounce the agency.
How symbolic is it that on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, it was exposed that UNRWA employees took part in the massacre? The UN is not only weaponized to delegitimize our existence, but also to physically exterminate us.
This now means that a major source for aid, shelter and assistance for displaced Gazans is under threat.
UNRWA is already denouncing its incapacity to deliver aid as necessary because of the bombing in safe areas, because of the cutting of telecommunication that do not allow delivery of aid to take place, and the collapsing of the little law and order that remains in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. So defunding UNRWA at such a time, it's utterly irresponsible and immoral.
The Nasser hospital is the largest remaining functional hospital in Gaza, but the fighting is getting closer. Medics say that the hospital is on the verge of collapse, no longer able to provide vital medical services.
Of course, the medical equipment in the hospital is almost non-existent. The simplest things in the hospital, such as painkillers and anaesthesia tools, are not available. We're trying our best to deal with patients that arrive, and we're trying to keep them alive.
Some aid is able to pass through the tightly guarded crossings into Gaza, but humanitarian organisations say it is nowhere near enough. And at a moment where there are calls for more assistance, this cutting of international support deals a heavy blow for those just trying to survive. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News in Jerusalem.
And elsewhere in the Middle East, a fire on board a tanker in the Gulf of Aden has been put out, with all the crew on the vessel reported to be safe. The fire started following a missile strike claimed by Houthi rebels. It comes as the United States said it had destroyed another Houthi anti-ship missile aimed at the Red Sea. That U.S. strike came just hours after Houthi rebels based in Yemen attacked the Marlin Luanda in the Gulf of Aden. The head of Ukraine's Navy has told Sky News the West needs to allow his country to strike deeper inside Russian territory. UK, French and US missiles have played a key part in Ukraine's war effort. In September, UK-produced Storm Shadow cruise missiles were used in a strike on the headquarters of Russia's Black Sea Fleet in occupied Crimea. Then, in October, the Ukrainian military said US-supplied ATACMS missiles were deployed in 2 attacks on Russian-held airfields in Berdyansk and the Luhansk region. Towards the end of 2023, long-range ASRAM munitions and short-range TOW missiles were both provided to Ukraine by the UK and US, respectively. But Ukraine's naval chief has exclusively told our security and defense editor Deborah Haynes that allies need to allow his forces to strike deeper inside Russia.
The
head of Ukraine's Navy has an unusual piece of artwork. It's the lid from a missile tube used to sink the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet almost 2 years ago.
At
that moment, we knew Moscow could be defeated.
It's not the only war souvenir on display at a secret location in the southern city of Odessa. This is an arming pin for a British Storm Shadow cruise missile fired from a Ukrainian jet against Russia's naval base in occupied Crimea. Both attacks are part of a David versus Goliath-style fight between Ukraine's military and Russia's much larger navy, involving Western weapons, underwater drones, even jet skis.
Our successes during 2022 and 2023 were a result of difficult but innovative decisions, which did not exist before.
They included this strike with British missiles against the Black Sea Fleet's base in the Crimean city of Sevastopol last September that took out a submarine and a warship. In total, Ukraine has destroyed or damaged more than 24 Russian vessels, but future gains aren't guaranteed.
The enemy is adapting, and we must also adapt. A modern war is a war of technologies. Whoever wins in the technological sense will have victory.
The achievements at sea contrast with action on the land, where a Ukrainian counteroffensive has faltered and Russian forces are trying to advance. Adding to the pressure on Ukraine is the threat of war fatigue amongst its allies.
There is a concern that Ukraine will snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Are you worried about that too?
As a military man, I only have one job: to fight and to win.
He signalled this victory could come faster if Ukraine received permission to use its Western weapons against targets deep inside Russia.
The sooner the armed forces have the necessary battle capabilities and certain capabilities to destroy the enemy infrastructure facilities, the sooner we will win. Vladimir Putin behaves like a small-scale gangster who knows that if he is matched blow for blow, he will not start a fight.
Ukraine has used drones deep inside Russia and sent missiles just across the border. But it's a step the West has yet to sanction for its munitions, still nervous about escalation. Kyiv will be hoping these jitters soon fade. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Odessa.
The Queen has visited King Charles in hospital as he continues to recover from treatment for an enlarged prostate. It's not known how long the King will remain in hospital in central London. He was admitted for what Buckingham Palace said was scheduled treatment yesterday morning. A major incident was declared in Liverpool earlier this afternoon after a 4-story building caught fire. Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service said it was showing signs of collapse. The fire was brought under control and the fire service said there were no reports of casualties. Health authorities in the UK are stepping up the fight to control the spread of measles after what the World Health Organization called an alarming rise in cases across Europe. A campaign has been launched to encourage parents to get the MMR vaccine for their children, and pop-up vaccination clinics are being set up. Sky's Daniel Henry has more.
It started with a rash.
It looked awful. He was just completely covered. His eyes were swollen, his top lip was swollen. He was pale. They were initially worried that he was showing amber signs of sepsis. And so that's kind of how bad he was feeling and looking at the time.
11-month-old Oscar was rushed to hospital. His mum Kelly was with him in the ambulance.
It was really scary, just not knowing, and the fever as well, just not being able to cool him down.
So let your arm go nice and floppy.
The UK Health Security Agency have recorded more than 200 cases across the West Midlands. But because measles spread so quickly, they're declaring it a national incident, which is why pop-up vaccination centres like this are opening up.
There have been 100 bookings made for vaccines at this hub here in Walsall, and there will be more through the day. Now, not all those bookings were for MMR. Some of them are for other things like the flu. But what the nurses here are doing is they're making sure that anyone who hasn't had the MMR vaccine is being offered it. And that, they say, is the best way to fight against this measles outbreak.
The vaccine is available to babies from 1 year old. This drive is to help those who may have missed it.
Obviously, with the outbreak, it is important to do MMR as soon as possible. But she hasn't had her MMR done yet, unfortunately.
What is it that drove you to get your vaccine today?
Actually, I feel probably I've had it in the past. But because I'm a healthcare worker and it's a requirement for my job.
You've been a nurse for 40 years. Have you seen an outbreak like this before?
Not really, no. I mean, it was quite a surprise that the rates were so high in the West Midlands. I think there is some concern about vaccine safety, and it's just really instilling in people the importance of being vaccinated for safety.
Oscar is getting better now. He was too young to get his jab when this outbreak began.
Should we make a cut?
Kelly says he's due to be vaccinated a few days after his first birthday next month. Daniel Henry, Sky News.
A day after a jury ordered that Donald Trump pay more than $83 million in defamation, he's back on the election campaign trail and without apology. The former president, who just had big victories in New Hampshire and Iowa, is now rallying support in Las Vegas for the next Republican contest. Well, our U.S. correspondent Martha Kellner joins us live from there. And Martha, was this defamation case just another setback that Mr. Trump will brush aside? I'm guessing the people there to support him don't really care too much about what they heard yesterday.
I think we've seen time and again, Barbara, with all of Donald Trump's legal travails, that it simply just fires up his support base, and his fervent supporters in Las Vegas today queuing round the block to be let in. In fact, the start of his rally was delayed by an hour because so many people showed up and there were problems with security. As you mentioned, just yesterday, Donald Trump ordered to pay a staggering $83.3 million to E. Jean Carroll by a jury found last year guilty of defaming her. E. Jean Carroll's lawyers, in her closing statement, said to this jury, given Donald Trump's enormous wealth, how much money, how big does this fine have to be to cause him to stop defaming E. Jean Carroll? And I think that is the golden question. So far in this speech that Donald Trump's giving in Las Vegas so far, he hasn't mentioned E. Jean Carroll, but that's not to say he won't. We saw him take to his Truth Social platform yesterday evening, calling the verdict absolutely ridiculous and saying an appeal was forthcoming. But he's likely to use this, as I say, to fire up his support base once more. Just consider this. Last year, the two biggest fundraising days for the Donald Trump campaign. The first was when he was arraigned in Manhattan for allegedly paying hush money to the porn star Stormy Daniels. The second was when he had that infamous mugshot taken of him when he was booked into a jail in Atlanta. His campaign had that picture put on T-shirts and cups and mugs and that sort of thing. So he is using this. He's using these courtroom dates almost like he uses his campaign dates. So we may see him in a conventional setting today in Las Vegas, this rally before the Nevada primary, but certainly it doesn't seem to be affecting his run to what is almost certainly going to be the Republican nomination now.
Absolutely. Martha Kellner with the latest there from the US. Martha, thank you. And let's get the latest sport now from Sky Sports News.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Well, Stuart, it's been a few months now since the end of what was an incredible Ashes series. How are you adjusting now to life after playing cricket?
Yeah, really enjoying it. I think ultimately finishing on my own terms was really important for me, and I knew that I wanted to finish by my last ball playing for England. England versus Australia was a major pinnacle for me in Ashes cricket, and it was such a exciting and exhilarating series that I almost got to the stage where I don't know if it gets any better than this, really. So yeah, it was great to be able to sort of make the decision on my own, finish on my own terms, and I don't think it will really properly hit me until the Test team play again, and Jimmy Anderson and Ben Stokes are walking out with an England cap on in their whites. I think that might sort of feel real, that I won't ever do that again. But no, at the moment I've got no regrets and feel really happy.
In the book you spoke about the fact that retirement only really came to you during the Old Trafford tests. So you came to a massive decision quite quickly. Yeah,
within 10 days, I think. So yeah, it was pretty stressful. Ultimately, anytime you walk away from something you love, it's really difficult. And I was loving playing cricket. I was loving working under Stokesy and Baz. It was great fun. I didn't feel much pressure. The communication was really good, and I was bowling really well and felt fit. So a lot of those things would say, carry on playing. And I honestly felt like I could do another couple of years, but I kept sort of bringing myself back to what's my next Everest, what's my next major challenge. I always need a challenge because I've got this goal to always continuously improve. I need something to charge towards and chase. And whenever I've written down in my whole career what's my next Everest, bang, within 30 seconds I've written down and I know what to target, and I just couldn't quite nail something down. So I think that ultimately told me that it was the right time to move and try something different.
Next Ashes 2 years away. Would that have felt too far when you were making that decision a few months ago?
No, I think I'd still be fit and fresh to play, but I know that a young family played a part as well. Annabella's turning 1. The travel's a lot in international cricket, and the young years are so valuable. Ultimately, I'm 37. Next Ashes be 39, and although I still feel like I'd be able to play, I didn't want to sacrifice some sort of memories and special moments I could share with my family up until then, and because you have to dedicate your life to playing for England, you have to dedicate everything to it, and you know, I'd done that for 17 years, and you know, it's time to still feel very focused on a career, but spend a bit more time at home.
And you bowed out in magical circumstances. Last ball you hit for 6, last ball you bowled was a wicket. 150 wickets in Ashes cricket. What was it about that series that always tended to get the best from you? Yeah,
great question. I think a lot of it's, I grew up on Ashes cricket. My dad played in the Ashes in 86, 87, won it over in Australia. So, you know, we talked about Ashes cricket in my household a lot, and I watched loads of it. And fortunately, I watched a lot of Australia winning, which grew my, competitive spirit to wanting to play a part in the Ashes and win the Ashes. So, I think the team, the Australian culture, I enjoy playing against because it is highly competitive. It's aggressive. It's up front.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
The White House has intervened after what they called a very alarming series of fake, explicit images were shared online of the pop star Taylor Swift. The Biden administration has called on Congress to take legislative action over the deep fakes, which are now becoming more widespread in the world of celebrity and politics. Sky's Amelia Harper has more.
This might look like Tom Cruise, but it actually isn't. Made by a deep fake account, it's been created with artificial intelligence.
Ouch. Huge mistake.
Here, the former US president appears to join the cast of TV show Breaking Bad, except he hasn't. This is a deep fake too. And while these might seem amusing, there are plenty that aren't. Pop star Taylor Swift has had new fake sexually explicit images of her viewed millions of times online. The images were removed amid outrage from fans and concern from America's highest office.
It is alarming. So while social media companies make their own independent decisions about content management, we believe they have an important role to play in enforcing their own rules.
And deepfakes are even affecting the White House itself. This is a fake recording of US President Joe Biden ahead of the New Hampshire primary election.
It's important that you save your vote for the November election.
These deepfakes have the potential to spread disinformation, a rising threat to democracy, especially around elections. Using artificial intelligence, they can be very believable. So much so that you might have thought that was me speaking, but it wasn't. That was a deep fake of my voice, and it took less than 5 minutes to make online. The question now for tech companies is whether more needs to be done to prevent deep fakes from being made. The chief executive of Microsoft says they do.
I go back to, I think, what's our responsibility, which is all of the guardrails that we need to place around the technology so that there's more safe content that's being produced.
And it's not just high-profile people like Taylor Swift at risk from deep fakes and artificial intelligence.
If you've ever uploaded a picture to social media, if you have ever uploaded a video where your voice is there, then this could happen to you. And that is really, really scary if we think about the billions of pictures that are being uploaded every day.
It's becoming easier to use artificial intelligence to fake reality. And while anyone can make it, anyone can be a victim. Amelia Harper, Sky News.
Landmarks across the UK have been lit up in purple throughout this evening to commemorate Holocaust Memorial Day. At Piccadilly Circus, a visual representation of 6 million candles was shown on the billboards, one candle for each of the lives lost. These were the images from the banks of the River Thames looking across at the London Eye. And this was the scene in the Welsh capital, Cardiff, at the Wales Millennium Centre, as people across the UK, across the world, paid their respects. Meanwhile, a single candle was placed in the window of number 10 Downing Street. Ahead of the commemoration, the King said that it was, in his words, a valuable opportunity for the richly diverse communities of this nation to come together and recommit to building a society free from anti-Semitism, persecution, and hatred. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview. Tonight, I'm joined by the journalist and author Christina Patterson and The Spectator's assistant editor, Cindy Yu. Welcome both. Among the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Sunday Express. Their headline, Rishi targets saga votes to win election. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
All the German concentration camps in Poland were being sort of emptied, and there were marching people. Initially, they were going by train, but afterwards they marched, and they were called the death marches. And the camps in Germany became terribly overcrowded. So when we arrived, I went there from Ravensbrück. We spent the night in a very big tent, enormous tent. And there were all different nationalities, different languages spoken. It was quite a shock. And then the next day they took us into the camp. And I'll just describe very briefly the scene that sort of hit us. The first thing that you felt was the smell and the smog. And I can explain why it was there. The smog was from burning bodies. They couldn't get rid of the bodies quickly enough. And they were burning them, and they were putting them into big holes. And it was just all chaotic. Everything was breaking down. And then there were people there that we saw, but they were like skeletons. And they were shuffling along aimlessly. And as they shuffled, they would just collapse and die. And so there were dead bodies all over the place, and piles of dead bodies, and piles of decaying bodies. It was really horrific.
This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. First, though, let's take a look at our top stories. The post office chairman has been forced out of his job after mounting tension with the government following the Horizon IT scandal. The UK and the US have halted funding of the UN operation which supports Palestinians in Gaza over allegations of involvement in the October 7th attack. And Ukraine's naval chief has told Sky News he wants permission to use Western weapons deeper inside Russia. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with journalist and author Christina Patterson and The Spectator's assistant editor Cindy Yu. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. Well, The Telegraph reports that UK warships do not have the firepower to attack Houthi rebel bases in Yemen in response to their attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. The paper quotes former top defense officials describing the situation as a scandal. The Sunday Times leads with a report by its Insight investigative team that top universities are paying middlemen to recruit lucrative overseas students, despite the fact that they have lower grades than UK applicants. The Mail on Sunday leads with allegations that a charity in the Congo connected to Prince Harry operates what the paper calls an armed militia engaged in beating, rape and torture of indigenous people. The charity says it's aware of the claims and that they're being investigated, but says it has a zero-tolerance policy towards any human rights abuse. The Sunday Express says that Rishi Sunak is targeting people over 50, the so-called saga generation, with a raft of policy aimed at them to help him win the next general election. The Mirror, meanwhile, says that the Electoral Commission has accused the Conservative Party of trying to rig that election by changing the voting rules to boost their chances at the ballot box. And the Sunday People leads with claims that baby killer nurse Lucy Letby has been given a key to her own cell in what the paper calls a cushy private prison, much to the anger of her victims' families. And the Star has a story about a performance of Shakespeare's Scottish play being disrupted by a bout of wind coming from the audience. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you'll see on screen during the program, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discuss them. And we are joined tonight by journalist and author Christina Patterson and The Spectator's assistant editor Cindy Yu. Welcome both. Great to see you. So let's start with the Sunday Telegraph, and it's on the front page near the headline, UK warships lack missiles to take out Houthi bases. One of the stories I mentioned there. Under-equipped Navy's inability to strike land targets is a scandal. That's what a former top brass, as they call him in the Sunday Telegraph, calls him. I don't know about scandal, certainly a worry. Christina?
Well, there seems to be a continuing theme emerging over, in particular, the last week, which is that our armed forces just aren't up to it. They've been increasingly cut, and a number of top army people and former army people are now speaking out. And as the world is becoming increasingly unstable, then this is clearly a worry. In fact, there's even been talk in the last few days of possible conscription. And, for example, if Trump does become president of the US, which is, of course, a horrific thought, and if he does, as he has said he will, end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours, which would only happen by him essentially saying, yeah, Putin, go ahead, take the land you want, it's yours, then, of course, that would be seen as a go-ahead for Putin to continue with his expansionist plans, and then there's a very real possibility of more war in Europe in years to come. So, yet again, we have joined the US in military action, in this case against the Houthis, in order to make a statement about us being, special relationship and all the rest of it. But the reality is we can't really match our words with our action and with our resources.
Cindy, what do you make of it?
I think this also comes today as the Telegraph on Saturday talks about how the US is thinking about putting nuclear weapons back onto UK soil as part of its plans to kind of bolster the US military forces, I guess, in the UK. And those were nuclear weapons that were taken out in 2008. So I think what it really shows is that between 2008 and 2024, the 16 years, the world is a very much different place now. The reason those weapons were taken away was because the Cold War was assumed to be over. Clearly, that may have led to some complacency in the British military forces as well, even though senior officials have been warning for years, actually, that we are lacking certain kinds of capabilities. But I guess in the last few years, whether it's the situation in the Middle East or in Ukraine or rising China, indeed, it's making us think again, well, is this kind of military that's actually fit for the future? And we can ally with America on all sorts of things. But as Christina says, if America is not reliable, then that's a different picture altogether.
So do you think we will be we will see changes over the coming years to both the military or, our attitude to spying or various things?
Well, I think the problem is it's not actually that, I don't think it's the armed forces who've been complacent. I think it's governments have been just cutting everything. I mean, cutting all our public services, and I think they have been complacent. And I think it's a weird thing that the Tories are meant to be very hot on security, and they have been extremely cold on security. And they've a number of very senior people in the armed forces have said that we are really not in a position now to kind of take any significant role in any major conflict, and that's very frightening.
Okay, let's go to another story, still in the Sunday Telegraph, linked to the government, and this is Badenoch ousts chairman of the post office, and this is a story that actually our city editor, Mark Kleinman, broke a little earlier today, that the chairman of the post office is being forced out of the role amid frustration in Whitehall over the post office. Cindy, what do you make of the story, and what do you think might be behind it? Why now?
Well, the thing is, Henry Staunton, the chairman who's just been forced out, only took the job in December 2022. So he wasn't there in that job when a lot of this historic scandal was happening. And so it does feel like it's actually coming from a place of the government having frictions in dealing with the post office, in trying to change the structures to do with it. Whitehall is basically saying, there are appointments with senior personnel, there's disagreements over how quickly the compensation should be paid to former postmasters, all of that kind of stuff that's causing friction, where Henry Staunton seems to have disagreed with the government, and Kemi Badenoch has just said, well, you can go then, because we need to fix this. And I think what it shows is basically the political toxicity or the sensitivity around the story about how the government really realises it needs to fix this very, very quickly. And if it can't, then it risks kind of blowing back on it even more. I mean, at the moment, it's only Sir Ed Davey who seems to be taking most of the flak at the moment.
Because there's so much attention on the story. Now, obviously a lot of this dates back decades, but now attention and focus is on them about what they're doing right now.
Yes, but I think that, it's a complex web, isn't it, this story, because so many people seem to have been complicit. And as you say, Cindy, Ed Davey seems to have got a ludicrous amount of the hostility in relation to this. I think the thing is, the government has changed its story, because I think the general sense was, let's make this go away. And so the government, of course, the post office is partially funded by the government. And so I think I think because the public mood has changed, the government is now addressing this in a different way. And Kemi Badenoch presumably thought that Henry Staunton wasn't doing a good enough job. But it sounds to me as though there are other political things going on there as well.
Yeah, we're just on that, on Christina's point. It's Kemi Badenoch. She is the front runner with the Tory grassroots when it comes to the next Tory leader. We are going into an election year, so everything has to be seen in that light a little bit too.
Exactly, yeah.
Speaking of election year, let's go to the Mirror, the Sunday Mirror front page. Picture of Rishi Sunak. Tories are rigging rules on election. They have been accused of changing the rules to boost their votes at the general election. Cindy, how are they accused of trying to do this?
So this is actually a relatively exceptional warning from the Electoral Commission about rules that the Tories are going to put in next week through Parliament, basically upping the upper limit on party donations to £35 million, also allowing expats to vote. At the moment, there's a 15-year limit on whether or not they can vote, 15 years out of the country, and they can no longer vote. The Tories are thinking about changing that, and then also requiring voter ID at the polling booths as well. All of these have potentially big repercussions for how the voter turnout looks next election, especially if they can get rich expats overseas to turn out for them in their marginal constituencies, or maybe exclude certain voters from the polling booths by requiring ID. It's all a bit up in the air at the moment in terms of the actual implications.
Christina?
Yeah, it does. I think the Election Commission is a non-partisan and independent body, and I think we should be alarmed and people attached to it generally are very scrupulous about doing their job professionally and well. So if they are saying that this is rigged, I think we need to take that seriously. And I think, given how things were in this country under Boris Johnson in particular, and how he didn't hide his attempts to change the rules in order to favour him in a rather Trumpian way, I think we should be a bit worried. And I particularly think the stuff about voter ID. Everybody everybody knows that young people are less likely to vote, less likely to have voter ID. So this does look as an attempt to rig things, which, luckily is unlikely to work.
Let's go to a different kind of story, but one that has obviously, been in the headlines a lot. And this is the Sunday Express, page 7. And, of course, those horrific stabbings in Nottingham. And this shock claim, knife killer knew what he was doing, two consultant psychiatrists concluded. The killings were obviously horrific, and now these massive questions of whether basically, Valdo Calocane should have been stopped before.
Yes, and a lot rests on how sane he is seemed to have been. I mean, the court's experts, 3 different experts, said that he was too schizophrenic to be allowed any kind of responsibility, so it was manslaughter. But actually, the victims' families and those who are supporting them have reached out to other psychiatrists who say that he should have known what he was doing. So a lot rests on basically how much responsibility he can be claiming. And given that the killings come as a result of a multi-agency failure in the first place, I do feel like the CPS has a lot of pressure on this one to at least get the sentencing right.
Yeah, obviously, unsurprisingly, the families of the victims are really, we've heard some very strong words from them.
Yeah, this is just a heartbreaking case. And as Cindy says, it's a multi-agency failure because it seems that the NHS let Valdo Calocane down, and the families and the police also didn't take great efforts to investigate and claimed, for example, that he was sofa surfing when he did, in fact, have a permanent address. But I think the key, I have very strong views about the depiction of people with schizophrenia. My late sister had schizophrenia, and it's an illness that is very often misunderstood. And obviously, the vast majority of people with schizophrenia do not go around murdering people. And I think that it's a fine line as well. You can't really say whether someone is sane or not sane. But I think that the really salient thing in this story is that the families do not feel justice has been done. And given that they can never, ever get their loved ones back and will be not particularly anyone, but, to be a mother and to lose your child is probably one of the worst things that could ever happen to you. And to be living with that anguish forever and feel that the system has let you down is a double tragedy. So I think that there have been serious failings in this.
Christina, we're going to have to leave it there for now. Stay with us, though, because coming up, what the Sunday Times found when it started investigating the recruitment of overseas students at top UK universities.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. Well, there's a real sense now that people are beginning to expect that this whole airlift is coming to an end, and they're really, really desperate. We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people and putting them into trucks. You either live and recover, or you die. Okay, so that's like a war.
That's the war, yes.
Yeah. We help you understand the world with us. Over the past 24 hours, the soldiers have been attacked on a number of occasions. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We've been crushed. To take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. They were convinced the United States would become hooked. Well, they were right.
An enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster that's just landed in between us.
The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Thought I could throw a bit of pig withdrawn. It's so hot.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, the journalist and author Christina Patterson and the Spectator's assistant editor, Cindy Yu. So thanks so much for staying with us. Let's go straight to the Sunday Times. Very interesting story here on their front page. Exposed foreign students get secret route to top universities. Basically, that some foreign students, who of course now pay vastly more than British students, and now even EU students paid the same as, they used to pay the same as UK. Now they pay the same as other foreign students, are basically being given an easy ride in. Cindy, what did you make of the story?
Yeah, so it's an investigation from the Sunday Times where they went undercover to talk to some of these middlemen going from families to universities and basically taking a large cut in the process. And some of these CEOs apparently are paid more than some university vice chancellors, which is quite incredible. It just shows you the amount of money involved in this. And that's because foreign students pay up to £38,000 a year compared to a domestic student of around £9,000 a year. But it also means that, if you have A-level grades equivalent to D, D and E, which is not very impressive in the UK, you can still get onto Russell groups through these kind of backdoor methods of this so-called one-year pathway, after which you go on to the proper undergraduate degree. So it's a big scandal, if everything is as it seems from the report. There are no loopholes or anything like that, because people in this country struggle to get onto university courses with much better grades. And there's also a question about reliance, of course, of the higher education system on foreign students.
But I suppose, Christina, if you're looking at some foreign students paying effectively 4 times as much as some, as domestic national students, and a lot of universities being short of cash, you can see how something like this would happen.
Absolutely. And the other day I heard an academic justifying this whole thing by saying that because people were arguing, but foreign students are taking places from British students. And he was saying, no, actually, foreign students are paying for subsidising British students, because if British students paid the real cost, then the fees would be much higher. So there is that argument. And when this flashed up on my phone earlier today, I thought, we'll know that already. But actually, the details are pretty shocking, not least, as Cindy says, the fact that some of the CEOs of these agencies are paid more than vice chancellors, and vice chancellors are not exactly underpaid, often earning several times what the Prime Minister earns. But I think what's really shocking about this is that it's lowering, not just lowering academic standards in terms of the reputations of universities and what a university place and course is worth and what it says if you're doing a degree at that place, but it's lowering the standard of teaching. Because if you are in a lecture room or a tutorial group with people who don't have anything like the level of knowledge you have, or the English language skills, and the lecturers are having to put enormous amounts of effort into adapting their teaching to accommodate essentially people who shouldn't be there in the first place according to normal academic standards, then that really is a disgrace. And I think it shows how broken the funding model is for British universities, because they are technically run as businesses, but they're not really businesses. So they're a kind of peculiar hybrid that is very uncomfortable, not least for academics. A number of my friends are academics. And when the student becomes a consumer, and if, for example, they're studying creative writing and they're not that brilliant, and you say they're not that brilliant, and they're paying vast amounts in order to be told they're not that brilliant, it's very awkward.
Cindy, we've got 40 seconds, but do you think that then if the system is just not working, as Christina says, then what could make it work? Or are we looking at a model like the United States where students really are consumers?
Well, one thing that could make it work, but it's not going to happen, is more funding for the higher education system, so that academics are not reliant on these kind of cash cows of foreign students. But that's not going to happen.
OK, well, we'll see. Who knows? Cindy and Christina, thank you both so much. And now let's take a quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The rain belt, trying to push into the northwest, will stall as it runs into the high-pressure sitting over southern parts of the country. Western parts of the country will be mild and breezy overnight. The cloud will be thick enough to give some patchy rain and drizzle at times. Skies will be clearer through central, eastern and southeastern parts, allowing temperatures to fall low enough for a touch of frost in places. Showery outbreaks of rain will become heavier over western parts of Ireland and Scotland through the morning. Winds will increase with gusts in excess of 60 or 70 miles an hour in the far northwest. It'll be breezy elsewhere, but dry. Low cloud will develop over central, southern and southwestern parts. It will be mild for most, with temperatures reaching double figures. Parts of Wales and Northern Ireland could see values as high as 17 Celsius. Rain and gale force winds will take over Ireland and Western Scotland by the evening.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
And coming up next on Sky News at 11, the Post Office chairman pays the price being forced out after mounting tension with the government following the Horizon IT scandal.